Hello, everyone. I'm Tanya Rivero in for Elaine Quijano. President Trump just sat down with CBS Evening News anchor Jeff Glor. We will show you some of that in a moment. But first, we want to recap how we got here. On Friday, Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein announced the indictments of 12 Russian intelligence agents for alleged hacking during the 2016 election, including the hacking of emails from the Democratic National Committee. Then on Monday, President Trump said he brought up the issue of Russian interference with President Putin at their summit in Helsinki. But in a press conference, Mr. Trump broke with the assessment of U.S. intelligence agencies and appeared to side with the Kremlin leader.
People came to me, Dan Coates came to me, and some others. They said they think it's Russia. I have President Putin. He just said it's not Russia. I will say this. I don't see any reason why it would be.
After facing sharp criticism from both sides of the aisle, President Trump tried to walk back his comments Tuesday by saying he messed up one word.
In a key sentence in my remarks, I said the word would instead of wouldn't. The sentence should have been, I don't see any reason why I wouldn't, or why it wouldn't be Russia. So just to repeat it, I said the word would instead of wouldn't. And the sentence should have been, and I thought it would be maybe a little bit unclear on the transcript or unclear on the actual video. The sentence should have been, I don't see any reason why it wouldn't be Russia.
But on Wednesday, the president walked back his reversal.
Is Russia still targeting the U.S., Mr. President?
Thank you very
let's
much.
go. Make your way out. No, you don't believe that to be the case? Let's go. We're finished here.
Senator Schumer said you would walk back.
Press, let's go.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Make your way out. Can you just
We're doing very well. We are
go.
doing very well, and we're doing very well, probably as well as anybody has ever done with Russia. And there's been no president ever as tough as I have been on Russia.
The White House then tried to clear up what the president said at the press briefing Wednesday.
Earlier, Cecilia asked the president, is Russia still targeting the U.S.? He said no. Is that what the president actually believes? Did he understand the question? And is his position that no, Russia is not doing anything to interfere or meddle in the 2018 election?
I had a chance to speak with the president after those comments, and the president said thank you very much and was saying no to answering questions. The president and his administration are working very hard to make sure that Russia is unable to meddle in our elections, as they have done in the past and as we have stated.
So he does believe it's going on.
Well, since there's currently not an election today, not specifically, but we certainly believe that we are taking steps to make sure they can't do it again. Unlike previous administrations, this president is actually taking bold action and reform to make sure it doesn't happen again. But he does believe that they would target certainly U.S. elections again.
Between the president and the DNI coach who said the red lights are blinking on this topic.
No, as I just said, that's why we're taking steps to ensure that these things don't happen again. We wouldn't actually spend as much time and effort as we are if we didn't believe that they were still looking at us. From the beginning of his administration, President Trump has actually taken action to defend our election system from meddling and interference. I want to read through a few of the things that we're doing. In May of 2017, President Trump signed an executive order to strengthen and review the cybersecurity of our nation and its critical infrastructure. The Department of Homeland Security has taken the lead in working with all 50 states, local governments, and private companies to improve election security. DHS has increased coordination among all election partners. 34 states, 52 county and local governments, and 5 election companies receive cybersecurity scans regularly from DHS. DHS plans to provide on-site risk and vulnerability assessments to all states that request it. So far, 18 states have requested this assessment. A new pilot program was launched to increase rapid response capabilities on Election Day, and in 2017, on-site cybersecurity support was provided. In March of 2018, Congress provided the Election Assistance Commission with $380 million in funding for election assistance grants to states. These are steps that we've taken to prevent it from happening. These are steps that we've taken because we see that there's a threat there. Cecilia.
Thank you, Sarah. I just want to clarify what you just said. Dan Coates said point blank the threat is still ongoing from Russia. Does this White House believe that currently this threat is still ongoing?
Certainly, like I just said, we believe that the threat still exists, which is why we are taking steps to prevent it. Again, you wouldn't go through that lengthy process if you weren't.
And President Trump spoke with CBS Evening News anchor Jeff Glor just moments ago. You will hear some of their conversation here on CBSN for the first time. Glor asked the president directly about Russian President Putin. Let's listen to that.
You say you agree with U.S. intelligence that Russia meddled in the election in 2016.
Yeah, and I've said that before, Jeff. I have said that numerous times before. And I would say that that is true, yeah.
But you haven't condemned Putin specifically. Do you hold him personally responsible?
Well, I would, because he's in charge of the country, just like I consider myself to be responsible for things that happen in this country. So certainly, as the leader of a country, you would have to hold him responsible, yes.
What'd you say to him?
Very strong on the fact that we can't have meddling, we can't have any of that. Now, look, we're also living in a grown-up world. Will a strong statement, President Obama supposedly made a strong statement. Nobody heard it. What they did hear is the statement he made to Putin's very close friend. And that statement was not acceptable. Didn't get very much play, relatively speaking, but that statement was not acceptable. But I let him know we can't have this. We're not going to have it. And that's the way it's going to be.
And now let's bring in CBSN political contributors Caitlin Huey-Burns, Graham and Lynda Tran. Caitlin is a national political reporter for Real Clear Politics. Michael is a columnist for the Boston Herald and politics editor for NewHampshireJournal.com. And Lynda is a founding partner at 270 Strategies. Thanks to all of you for being with us. I want first to get everyone's reaction to the president's comments on Putin. Caitlin, let's start with you.
Well, this is certainly different than what we heard the president say when he was standing next to Putin. Directly asked during that press conference whether he believed the intelligence agencies of the United States or whether he believed Vladimir Putin himself, and he could not answer that. Now, we are a couple days after that, after the so-called walk back yesterday. And so the question is, what comes next? What could the president say in the days to come? What will he say at rallies moving forward? It is clear, though, that the White House, judging from Sarah Sanders' comments today, wants to move on from this, and we'll see whether this continues to linger.
Michael, I want to have you weigh in on that. I mean, we did hear him respond to Jeff Glor by saying, yes, I hold Putin personally responsible.
The events in Helsinki were the bottom of the Trump presidency thus far. If people want to know when was it its worst, that was the worst. And it is because so many of his allies were so upset. Now his allies are looking for any opportunity to move on. And so when they see his interview with Jeff Glor, they're going to say, see, he's moving on. And they're just going to get away from it. If I were President Trump, this would be my concern. What is his number one selling point? Strength. And we talked about this on CBSN yesterday, that the three words that can kill Donald Trump aren't impeach him now. They are he looked weak. And when he's now saying something that he apparently wasn't willing to say for whatever reason to Putin while he was there, it just amplifies that. And I've got friends who are just totally on the Trump train. They're angry at me that I won't get on board. And they are every day, is he doing better? Do you think he looks better? They sense that this is a different moment for him politically. He does need to move on.
It's so much about appearances there, Michael.
Exactly.
So, Lynda, can you weigh in? What did you think of that exchange between Jeff Glor and President Trump?
Well, first, Tanya, I just have to say the whiplash is painful. I mean, back and forth and back and forth this week. On the one hand, Putin and him have made a deal of some sorts, or he feels good about it. The next day, he's backtracking and fumbling that and trying to rely on this whole would versus wouldn't exchange and ignoring the rest of the entire press conference, which had many of the same problems that positioned him as siding with Putin instead of the intelligence community. And now you have him talking to Jeff Glor. And even in this conversation, even when he says that he holds Putin responsible, he's kind of quibbling and awkward and clearly not thrilled about saying it. So I think it's pretty clear this week where he actually stands on things.
It is amazing how much you can get out of the body language and just the tone. It really is. It's fascinating. So, Caitlin, how long do you think, President Trump can keep coming out against members of his own administration?
Well, you know, it is pretty startling, the idea that he was standing next to Putin and saying then that, you know, wouldn't clearly say that he was supportive of U.S. intelligence agencies over Putin. And in the interview with Jeff Glor on Saturday, when he was asked about his own DNI, Director of National Intelligence, Dan Coats, saying, you know, ringing the alarm bells about the way in which Russia could launch a cyber attack. And he kind of said, well, I don't know about that. He undermined his DNI in that interview. He undermined him on the world stage standing next to Putin. So I think Linda brings up a really important point, which is we've seen him over the past 24 hours kind of, you know, reading off a paper and prepped by aides perhaps to respond in a way that he knows Republicans, at least on Capitol Hill, want him to. And they are giving him a bit of a lifeline here. You heard from some Republican lawmakers say today, well, he misspoke and he admitted that, and let's move on. So it's really interesting to see that dynamic, especially on an issue like Russia. It is true.
It goes back, though, a little bit to something we were touching on earlier, Michael, this issue of appearances. You know, when he's reading off of a piece of paper, it's almost as if, well, this is what they want me to say, you know, and how does that come across?
Well, once again, it doesn't come across as strong. It's not the Trump that people love who's out on the campaign trail and he'll say anything he wants to say. And people are kind of heartened by that because they feel like they need an ally on their side who's not going to parse every word, who's going to be just as tough with the left as conservatives feel the left is with them. But I'd like to quibble with a word that we're using, that he was picking Russia over his intelligence agency. It very came across to me and to some other conservatives I've talked to. It sounded very much like he was picking Russia over America. There's always been this kind of odd undertone to the premise of the Make America Great Again approach. Trump is very negative about it. We make terrible trade deals. We get taken advantage of. We're big dummies. And in a certain part, he's talking obviously about previous administrations, about mistakes we've made in the past. A certain part of his audience hears that and say, yeah, and Trump's going to turn that around. But there's almost like a dark tone, like that he seems to see in his mind America and Russia as truly moral and geopolitical equivalents. And that is a terrible message that does not play well with the Republican base.
Absolutely. Linda, can you weigh in there? What do you think about that? I mean, how long can Mr. Trump sort of keep up this attack on his own administration?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree with Michael more. I mean, here is a president who prides himself on being unorthodox, but what he did this week was demonstrate himself to be wholly un-American, and that absolutely is not going to play well with anyone in the country, much less the people who really adhere to this Make America Great slogan of his. You know, the other problem for Donald Trump is that this isn't just any year or any moment. It's an election year. And what he did in one fell swoop this week is arm Democrats with a message on the campaign trail that is, you know, leveraging this moment and saying, are you with America? Or are you with Trump and Vladimir Putin? That is a very, very dangerous place for him to be, and it's a dangerous place for his party to be. And I think it's going to be a significant problem moving forward, especially given how much he's fumbled things, even in the aftermath of all this. We saw this stunning rebuke from John McCain and the statement that I couldn't have imagined Hollywood writing any differently, saying that this was kind of the lowest moment in American presidential history, that he was debasing and betraying the country. And this, I think, is a shared emotion that we've seen on both sides of the aisle all week long.
Can anyone get to the root of why President Trump does seem to be somewhat cowed by President Putin, why he seems to be somewhat enthralled by him? Do we have any read into that, Caitlin?
You know, I've posed this question to Republican lawmakers on the Hill, and even they can't quite answer it. Mm-hmm. And they use, they set up a few different contrasts. You know, Republican lawmakers say that, you know, Trump had talked tough on the North Korean dictator. Then, of course, he had that meeting, but he has never talked tough against Vladimir Putin. Yes, his administration has acted in terms of sanctions and other things, acted upon the evidence produced by the intelligence agencies, acted upon those indictments coming from DOJ and the Mueller probe as it pertains to Russian agents interfering in the election. But he has taken a very different tone while he is president and also while he was campaigning. We know the president is very driven by doing things that his predecessors couldn't or wouldn't do. And he keeps making the argument that he wants to have better relations with Russia, although he hasn't really outlined exactly what that looks like. And there have been Republican lawmakers who say, you know, we need more questions. We need more answers to what exactly the end goal is here, especially when we've seen Russia obviously invade a sovereign nation, among other items, interfere in the election, and continuing to do so now and in the future. There is a lot of skepticism about what the president is actually doing with this. And I would note that kind of how far we've come from when Mitt Romney was the Republican nominee and Paul Ryan, the current House Speaker, was on that ticket, calling Russia a geopolitical foe. That was only 6 years ago. Right. And now the party is kind of in this difficult position where their base, the base of the party and their voters don't want to see this real separation between Trump and their members.
Michael,
and
what do you think?
If I could remind everybody that when Mitt Romney said that, he was, of course, mocked by Barack Obama. And there are a lot of parallels in the actual policy between Barack Obama and Donald Trump that go back to this notion that every country thinks that it's exceptional, and therefore American exceptionalism is kind of odd. I'm very uncomfortable psychoanalyzing Donald Trump because it's who knows what the heck goes on inside there. But I do think that part of this might, some of his fans, I'll put it this way, some of his fans say that this is actually part of a broader strategy that he and his team believe that if Russia, China, and America are all kind of, working on a balance, that brings kind of fundamental order. Everybody can win. And if you think about it, you're a big developer. You want to build a big building. You don't mess. You're not going around apartment by apartment. You're building big high rise. You're dealing with other big guys. And it's kind of the big man view of the universe that the way to get stuff done is to have a handful of people who are in charge, and you kind of set policy. And I think that seems to be a template that he's applying on America when it comes to large powers like China and Russia. Of course, North Korea is kind of an odd situation because of the nuke issue. Then look how he treats these small powers, even though they're our friends. He treats them the way you'd think some bigwig running into some guy who builds, Section 8 housing would, get out of here. I get prime seats at the front of the table. There's kind of that approach that I think pervades his activity.
Lynda, would you like to weigh in there? I mean, is there a little bit of this idea that he knows that Vladimir Putin has spoken admiringly about him? Is there something to the fact that I like the people that like me?
Well, I mean, the big glaring question here is, what does Vladimir Putin have over Donald Trump, potentially? It has to be said, there's been a lot of discussion over the last several months and really since the start of this administration about this dossier and whether or not Russia has some sort of intel on Donald Trump that would be embarrassing or harmful to him or his company in some way. And anytime you see something like what happened this week, where he's bending over backwards to say positive things about an enemy of the state, somebody that elected leaders from both sides of the aisle has said is a true American adversary, he's bending over backwards to say positive things about him, it just raises the question, what on earth is going on here? And the fact is, we don't know where Donald Trump's finances really are because he's never released his tax returns. We don't know if there are any pieces of information, any sort of leverage that Russia has over him that is creating, as you put it, Tanya, this thrall out of Donald Trump.
All right. Now, earlier, I spoke with CBS News Chief White House Correspondent Major Garrett about the suggestion President Trump called an incredible offer. Russia offered to help out the special counsel at the Helsinki summit. And here's what Major said about the reactions he heard.
And I can tell you, immediately after that press conference, I was getting texts and emailing with sources I have within the intelligence community who were sifting through and vaguely, if not intensely, horrified by a lot that happened at that press conference, but they were deeply alarmed about that reaction from the president. Because, first of all, as the intelligence community sources I talked to said, we don't want to share any of our cyber apparatus, investigative tools, methods, tactics, anything with the Russians. We don't want to share with those who meddled in our election in 2016 and are trying to do so in 2018 how we're trying to stop them, point one. Right. Point two, we're not interested in having Russian justice be the ones determining who in America ought or ought not to be interrogated by their intelligence services. That's not something we're going to do, that we ought to do, or that we should even suggest we're open to thinking about, because their system of justice is completely different from ours. What we're most interested in is seeing if we can win the extradition of the 12 Russians indicted by Special Counsel Robert Mueller. That should be the focus, not having Russians come over here and interrogate Americans who they think did something wrong in Russia.
It does seem a bizarre and radical offer that Russia would even imagine that this is something that Americans would consider. And yet President Trump's response was very interesting. Caitlin, do you see any future where Russian intelligence could be on U.S. soil interrogating American citizens?
I can't see that happening. And it was really startling to hear the president talk in those terms and kind of entertain that possibility. Now, what's interesting is to watch how the State Department has responded to that versus what the White House has said. Mm-hmm. Sarah Sanders asked about that today, kind of just tried to move on and said, you know, it's just being considered or something to that effect. Heather Nauert, of course, who is at the State Department, she was saying, of course not, that's absurd. So you have this disconnect here, but again, something that raises a lot of alarm bells. And it's interesting because it's not clear what the president meant by that, what he understood about what that would actually mean. And the way in which he treated that, I think you saw bipartisan reaction. Even considering the notion would just be preposterous, according to these people.
Sort of a visceral reaction on both sides of the aisle there. Michael, what do you think?
I thought it worked great with Jim Belushi and Arnold Schwarzenegger in Red Heat. I thought it was a terrific combination that they had. No, it's ludicrous, and it goes back to that premise that, hey, we're just America. The thing that a typical American president would say is, are you kidding me? We are the light, the beacon on the shining city on the hill. You're Russia. You're this oligarchical backwater country that's economy smaller than many of our states. And there's no way we're the moral equivalent of you. We don't just try to destroy democracy. We try to promote democracy. That's what you would normally say. I do, however, have to push back on Lynda's suggestion that Trump is some kind of unwilling agent of Putin or whatever. Since Trump has been president, we've given offensive weapons to Ukraine. We've restored a missile defense system that Obama pulled from Eastern Europe. We've increased sanctions so much that the Russian watchers I talk to say all Russians will talk about anymore is sanctions. They're really hitting Putin's allies, the wealthy people that he needs to keep on board to stay in power. And we kept all the sanctions from the Obama administration, and then kicking the Russians on that gas pipeline and putting pressure on Europe not to take that gas. Those are all things that if you took the story, the bizarro Trump statements and everything away, you'd say, wow, that's a guy who's being pretty rough on Russia. Now, how you make that match Trump's words, I have no idea, but that is the record.
It's sort of the reverse of putting your money where your mouth is, right? So, Lynda, would you like to weigh in on that suggestion of a transfer of intelligence between the two countries?
Well, I mean, I think this is what happens when you have a president who can't be bothered to even read his daily briefing book. I mean, how long is it going to be okay that he is a novice when it comes to being in the position that he's in and doesn't care to learn how to be a statesman, how to be a diplomat, how to be somebody who works on the global stage the way that he has to? It's severely problematic, and it's why you're seeing, so much bipartisan pushback. It's why you're hearing people like James Comey saying things like vote for Democrats because there needs to be some sort of a balance here. It's a deep problem for him.
Thank you, Caitlin Huey-Burns, Michael Graham, and Lynda Tran. Fascinating discussion. Thanks to all of you for being with us.
Thank you.
Pleasure.